Article number 1, Puritans by K. Kaiser. The Puritans were a group of people who grew discontent in the Church of England and worked toward religious, moral, and societal reform. The writings and ideas of John Calvin, a leader in the Reformation, gave rise to Protestantism and were pivotal to the Christian revolt. They contended that the Church of England had become a product of political struggles and man-made doctrines. The Puritans were one branch of dissenters who decided that the Church of England was beyond reform. Escaping persecution from church leadership and the king, they came to America. Religious beliefs. The Puritans believed that the Bible was God's true law and that it provided a plan for living. Puritans stripped away the traditional formalities of Christianity, which had been slowly building through the previous 1,500 years. Theirs was an attempt to purify the church and their own lives. Most of the Puritans settled in the New England area. As they immigrated and formed individual colonies, their numbers rose from 17,800 in 1640 to 106,000 in 1700. Religious exclusiveness was the foremost principle of their society. The spiritual beliefs that they held were strong. This strength held over to include community laws and customs. Since God was at the forefront of their minds, he was to motivate all of their actions. This premise worked both for them and against them. The common unity strengthened the community. In a foreign land, surrounded with the hardships of pioneer life, their spiritual bond made them sympathetic to each other's needs. Their overall survival techniques permeated the colonies and on the whole made them more successful in several areas beyond that of the colonies established to their south. Each church congregation was to be individually responsible to God, as was each person. The New Testament was their model, and their devotion so great that it filled their entire society. People of opposing theological views were asked to leave the community or be converted. The doctrine of predestination kept all Puritans constantly working to do good in this life, to be chosen for the next eternal one. Predestination meant that God had already chosen who would be in heaven or hell, and each believer had no way of knowing which group they were in. Those who were wealthy were obviously blessed by God and were in good standing with him. The Protestant work ethic was the belief that hard work was an honor to God which would lead to a prosperous reward. Any deviations from the normal way of Puritan life met with strict disapproval and discipline. Since the church elders were also political leaders, any church infraction was also a social one. There was no margin for error. Puritans also believed that the devil was behind every evil deed. Constant watch needed to be kept in order to stay away from his clutches. Words of hellfire and brimstone flowed from the mouths of eloquent ministers as they warned of the persuasiveness of the devil's power. The sermons of Jonathan Edwards, a Puritan minister, show that delivery of these sermons became an art form. They were elegant, well-formed, exegetical renditions of scriptures with a healthy dose of fear woven throughout the fabric of the literary construction. Grammar children were quizzed on the material at school and at home. This constant subjection of the probability of an unseen danger led to a scandal of epidemic proportions, the Salem witch trials. Great pains were taken to warn their members and especially their children of the dangers of the world. Religiously motivated, they were exceptional in their time for their interest in the education of their children. Reading of the Bible was necessary to living a pious life. The education of the next generation was important to further purify the church and perfect social living. 3 English diversions were banned in their New England colonies: drama, religious music, and erotic poetry. The first and last of these led to immorality. Music and worship created a dreamy state which was not conducive in listening to God. Since the people were not spending their time idly indulging in trivialities, they were left with 2 godly diversions. For the first time in history, free schooling was offered for all children. Puritans formed the first formal school in 1635, called the Roxbury Latin School. 4 years later, the first American college was established, Harvard and Cambridge. Children aged 6 to 8 attended a dame school where the teacher, who was usually a widow, taught reading, ciphering, which is math, and writing were low on the academic agenda. In 1638, the first printing press arrived. By 1700, Boston became the second largest publishing center of the English Empire. The Puritans were the first to write books for children and to discuss the difficulties in communicating with them. At a time when other Americans were physically blazing trails through the forests, the Puritans' efforts in areas of study were advancing our country intellectually. Religion provided a stimulus and prelude for scientific thought. Of those Americans who were admitted into the Scientific Royal Society of London, the vast majority were New England Puritans. The large number of people who ascribed to the lifestyle of the Puritans did much to firmly establish a presence on American soil. Bound together, they established a community that maintained a healthy economy, established a school system, and focused an efficient eye on political concerns. The moral character of England and America were shaped in part by the words and actions of this strong group of Christian believers called the Puritans. Okay, so that's article number 1. Let's take a look at article number 2. This one is called "The Puritans Weren't So Puritanical, Scholars Say," by Mark O'Keefe. For more than 150 years, the Puritans have gotten a bum rap. That means a bad reputation. The colonizers of New England, credited with the first Thanksgiving, are most often portrayed as drab, glum, and pleasure-hating. You've seen the depictions, religious zealots whose idea of fun was burning a falsely accused witch, or narrow-minded prudes best described by the adjective they spawned, puritanical. But that image is a false one, scholars say. Some see Puritans planting the seeds of such core American values as industriousness, industry, idealism, and faith more than a century before the Declaration of Independence. Nearly all agree that their caricature doesn't do the Puritans justice. There's now a complete consensus that the popular image of the Puritans is almost totally inaccurate, said Mary Beth Norton, a professor of American history at Cornell University and author of the critically acclaimed In the Devil's Snare, a new book about the Salem witch trials. The Puritans were typical people of their time in that they enjoyed the pleasures of the 17th century. They liked to drink, they liked to sit and talk, they liked to eat well when they had the food to eat, they enjoyed sex, they also liked to play games like an early version of shuffleboard. Let's put it this way, they weren't ascetics like monks. Dissatisfied with the Church of England, Puritans aimed to purify it. Some left for America, including a small group later known as the Pilgrims, who arrived on the Mayflower in 1620. Other Puritans followed. Settling throughout New England, Pilgrims and Puritans alike promoted sex as a gift and duty from God, but only within the confines of marriage. To contemporary ears, that may not sound progressive, but it's an important and radical departure from traditional Catholic teaching which saw sex, even within marriage, as morally tainted, as almost a necessary evil, said Richard Godbeer, author of the new book, Sexual Revolution in Early America. Most people are quite surprised by what I have to say about Puritan sex and Puritan life in general, because they bring preconceptions they've absorbed from the Scarlet Letter and other works of that sort. The Scarlet Letter, Nathaniel Hawthorne's 1850 classic of American literature, made into a 1995 film starring Demi Moore, is set in Puritan New England, where a main character must wear a scarlet A for adulteress. It was fiction, but the public accepted its portrayals as fact. Prior to that, the Puritans were mostly romanticized as an American ideal. According to research by Brooks Holifield, professor of American church history at Emory University in Atlanta, the late 1800s saw increasing but sporadically negative portrayals of the Puritans, followed by full-blown disdain during the cultural upheaval of the Roaring Twenties. It was journalist H.L. Mencken who in 1928 famously defined Puritanism as the haunting fear that someone, somewhere, may be happy. Said Norton that gave Puritans a bad name from which they've never recovered. Other lows for the Puritan image include The Crucible, an Arthur Miller play written in 1953 set during the witch trials and shows Puritans as paranoid hypocrites, and a 1999 magazine ad for Saab convertibles that begins by saying, "It is sinful to seek any form of pleasure," and ends with, "Be careful, modern-day Puritans, who knows what this car could lead to." Despite academics' efforts to set the record straight, Puritans continued to be cast wearing drab clothing, when in fact they often wore colorful outfits for their era. They're portrayed as teetotalers, when records show they consumed large quantities of beer, rum, ale, and alcoholic cider. They're blamed for burning witches in Salem, even though convicted witches were usually hanged, not burned, and with less frequency and more due process of law than in Europe. Norton, author of the book on the witch trials, contends that Puritanism wasn't the cause of what happened in Salem. A better explanation is the 17th century mindset of intolerance and superstition prevalent worldwide, combined with a volatile mix of Massachusetts circumstances. There wasn't anything particularly Puritan about the witchcraft trial, she said, but there is something Puritan about America, as we've always known it, argues Charles Haynes, senior scholar of the First Amendment Center, a research group in Arlington, Virginia. He cites politics and the influence of John Winthrop as just one example. Winthrop, Puritan governor of the Massachusetts Bay Company, gave a 1630 sermon called A Model of Christian Charity. Winthrop used a phrase from the New Testament, Matthew 5:14, referring to America as a city on a hill that would inspire and lead the world. It has been customary for American presidential candidates to give at least one city on a hill speech, Haynes said, noting that Ronald Reagan repeatedly used the phrase as his overarching vision for the country. Similarly, Bill Clinton used the Puritan language of a new covenant to describe his political agenda. "We are all Puritans today in how we see the world and how we see America's place in the world," Haynes said. Moreover, if you truly study the Puritans, you can discover they were ahead of the curve in establishing women's rights, argues Mark Knoll, author of the new book, America's God, From Jonathan Edwards to Abraham Lincoln. "Women could inherit," said Knoll, a historian at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. "Women could run their husbands' businesses. Women could vote regarding their minister. And as early as the 1630s, women could vote for their political representatives." The difficulty for people is trying to make a complicated judgment of the Puritans. In some ways, the stereotypes are true. They're not made of whole cloth, but in other ways, the stereotypes are very false because they're comparing the Puritans with modern values instead of with the values of their contemporaries. Credit is given to the Puritans, and more specifically the Pilgrims, for establishing the first Thanksgiving in 1621, and gratitude for having survived a harsh winter that claimed many lives. But even here, scholars challenge the popular picture. They point out that the Puritans proclaimed days of thanks throughout the year when good things happened, and declared days of fasting and atonement when bad things happened. There is little doubt that a feast was shared with the Wampanoag Indians in 1621, but some argue it was a more traditional English celebration of the harvest. Virtually all scholars agree there was no original intent for an annual holiday. That didn't occur until 1863, when Lincoln officially set aside the last Thursday of November as a national day of Thanksgiving. Whatever really happened in 1621, Norton gives the Puritans some credit for our modern day of turkey, pumpkin pie, and pro football. The purpose was to thank God for something good that happened, she said. So in a sense, we do owe our Thanksgiving to them. And that's the end of the second article.